Welcome to WGLT Election 2020 coverage. I'm Charlie Schlenker. Throughout the campaign season, we're conducting interviews and forums with the candidates in various races. Today, we talk to the people running for state representative in the 105th District, covering part of Bloomington-Normal and eastward into rural McLean and Livingston counties. Videos of these interviews will be online as well. The candidates will have a 2-minute opening statement and equal time to answer questions. Candidates may request a follow-up response on any given question, and the opposing candidate will also have that opportunity. As moderator, I will call on candidates to make clarifying comments and may pose follow-up questions myself as well. In the case of a simple clarification, there won't be a need for equal time. We'll start with an opening statement from Kimberly Cummings, who won the coin toss. Kimberly?
Thank you. First, thank you to WGLT for hosting tonight's debate, to Charlie Schlenker for being our moderator, and most of all, thank you to our listeners. My name is Kimberly Cummings, and I am running for state representative. I have served on the Town of Normal City Council for the past 3 years. During that time, I have advocated for cities across the country while serving on the National League of Cities, Community and Economic Development Federal Advocacy Committee, University Cities Council, and the Racial Equity and Leadership Council. My passion for service and interest in political policy steered me to obtain a bachelor's degree in political science, and I'm currently working on a master's degree in political management. Illinois has been through a lot, but it is time to revive Illinois strong and energetic through improving education, our economy, and social equity. We are making strides, but we can do better. We can make education accessible and affordable for all, provide schools resources for better curriculum and instruction, provide adequate resources for K through 12 to return to school safely. We can do better by innovative thinking on rebooting our economy post an international pandemic. We can do better with an engaged advocate with unique experiences and perspectives to influence dialogue on a solution and make things more equitable and prosperous. We can do better to assure all people can see themselves in the family portrait of our community, no matter the race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, or religious affiliation. All of us should receive equal protection, access, and consideration under the law. Though we have accomplished some things, there is much work to be done. We can do better and rise. I'm Kimberly Cummings, and I'm running for state representative in the 105th District.
And Representative Brady, your opening statement.
Good evening, and thanks to all involved for tonight's forum, and to all of you for listening or zooming in, and for your interest in government. There's no other topic that has, or is, or will be center stage in all of our lives than COVID-19. The virus that has taken lives, caused monumental health problems, infected thousands upon thousands in Illinois, crippled businesses, education, and torpedoed daily lives. And yet so many, and especially our frontline workers, have risen to the occasion, and I say thank you for your service. There's a saying, lead, follow, get out of the way. And on the effects of COVID-19, I chose to lead for the people of the 105th District. I first began by meeting with local business owners on the afternoon of March 16th to prepare for the economic hardships that were about to unfold, helping to get answers to their questions of what is an essential business, help from insurance, the state of Illinois, health departments, and benefits for soon-to-be laid-off workers. Providing leadership during this tsunami was the biggest challenge I have faced as state representative. But I did so by providing the constituent service I'm known for, providing what seemed like around-the-clock service for my constituents, being accessible nights, weekends, and holidays, and never once closing my district office during the pandemic for any extended time. People knew they could reach out. Dan Brady and hundreds and thousands did exactly that. From emails to phone calls to office visits, conversations in stores or gas stations, people elected me to represent them, listen to them, and try and help them and their families. And that's exactly what I did. Even though our spring session in Springfield was canceled, I and others pushed to return to Springfield to have people's voices heard for a state budget. I thank the constituents who put their confidence in me to be their voice, and I ask for their vote of confidence on November 3rd. I look forward to our discussion tonight as our work continues on so many fronts together. Thank you.
You're listening to a 105th District State House Candidates Forum. This is 89.1 FM WGLT and WGLT.org. I'm Charlie Schlenker. As agreed, each candidate will have up to 90 seconds to answer questions with a 1-minute response if desired, after each candidate has had an opportunity to answer the initial question. On the ballot this fall is a proposed constitutional amendment to create a progressive income tax structure for the state of Illinois to replace the flat tax currently in place. You have differing positions on this issue. Tell us why you are for or against the amendment and what passage would do for or to the state, depending on your perspective. Representative Brady, you are first.
Well, I like to refer to this as really a politician's tax, not the graduated tax. Clear back to the 1960s when the state of Illinois enacted what was referred to then as a flat tax, which we continue to operate off of varying today. In the vote before myself in the legislature, I voted no on this issue. And I voted no for a couple of reasons that concerned me. The first, the portrayal at first was the rates. What were the rates going to be that people paid? We didn't know that. The next, of course, was going to be what type of guarantee in the future that rates won't be raised on the very people we're trying to protect in the middle class. And in looking across other states that have had a graduated tax, if you will, we have seen some of those states, in particular New York, plus California, out of those states that have had a degree of difficulty with losing the base that this was aimed for, the higher income, and losing that base and shifting more tax burden down to the very people it's supposed to protect, and that's the middle class. There is nothing that prevents a future General Assembly coming in and adjusting those rates to make the people pay more in tax. I believe we pay enough in tax. What we do with the money out of Springfield is where the problem lies.
And Councilmember Cummings, your turn on the tax amendment question.
Yes, thank you. I am clearly in support of the fair tax that we're looking to propose. This is the one thing that is very necessary for our communities going forward. Both the Civic Federation and the Center of Tax Budget and Accountability have both mentioned, and these are both nonpartisan organizations who have made recommendations that it would be one of the best ideas that we could utilize to move us forward as it relates to where we are in our deficit. And not only that, there are 32 states who actually currently have a progressive tax. And so it's not unheard of for a state to go this route. And like I said, this has been recommended. And we know that right now we really need what's necessary to pull us away from the structural deficit that we've been facing.
I'll ask a follow-up of Representative Brady. What makes it more difficult to change the income tax structure if there is a progressive scheme in place compared to raising the overall tax rate under the flat tax system? 1 minute.
Charlie, whatever you raise when it comes to tax revenue, with Springfield, the problem is what is done with the money. Under this proposal and the amendment that faced the people on a constitutional question, and I'm glad it's going to be a constitutional question to the people on the ballot November 3rd, but giving Springfield more without guarantees of what they have to do with the spending is wherein the problem lies. And so therefore, I believe that if there is protection with trying to make a switch of a flat tax to this graduated tax, there might be more merit to it. But not to have guarantees for the very taxpayers that I believe, if you look at some other states where this has been in place and has shifted back to the middle class, I know the protection's not there. And therefore, I think the very people we're trying to help, the middle class, are going to be the ones that eventually are paying more tax. Coupled with the fact, Springfield, in my experience with Springfield, give more money. It doesn't go to reduction of debt. It doesn't go to priorities in our state budget. It goes to other areas to which the electorate ends up having to always pay more.
Okay. Representative Brady, thanks. Councilmember Cummings, the follow-up question to you is slightly different. How would you defend the prospect of the concerns that Representative Brady raises, that it's too easy to change things, that it's too easy for it to be misspent?
Well, that's why, we go and represent to ensure that I know that we need to certainly push for the funds to help with our education system and the new funding formula that we've suggested for our schools to ensure that they have the dollars that they need. Also, when it comes to our pensions and getting back on track with those, we can certainly ensure and make sure that when we put together legislation that those things are covered and that is just not loosely spent. As leaders, that's what we're expected to do.
New question then, Councilmember Cummings, you start this question. The pandemic has had far-reaching negative effects on the small business climate, service sector workers, and many other parts of society. What should state lawmakers do at the present moment to cushion the current pressure under which people live? And I'm going to caution that there will be another question about the recovery process, so you don't need to enlarge your answer to that just yet. The current moment, and Councilmember Cummings, you start.
Thank you for that question. There are as much for us to do to kind of cushion some of the effects of what has happened through COVID-19, especially when it comes to small businesses. We want to ensure that many of them can stay open and continue to function. We want many of our businesses that are open today to continue to be here in the future and help our communities grow and thrive, specifically trying to ensure that there's assistance available to them, as well as those who are out working and trying to maintain their life and their lifestyles. So we do have to ensure that there is enough programming available for helping our communities to maintain and have some type of cushion.
And Representative Brady, what should be done right now by the legislature to address current needs?
Right now, go back to April very quickly. I was asked by the House Republican leader to chair a House Republican response to COVID-19, and I did that. And while there was 10 really points that we came up with to try and negotiate with the administration, some of those was enhancement access to government services, property tax payment fairness, property tax relief, protect the unemployment insurance benefits, enhance business liquidity, create a business loan program, standardize essential business and work towards reopening, automatic sunset extensions of many things that were crippling business in the state of Illinois to help them. A couple other areas which we did by legislation. One was in a bipartisan way. I worked for workers' compensation and unemployment insurance agreement, good for the workers and business in this state going through what they were going through. It did a number of things, but the unemployment insurance portion secured federal funding for benefits and claimants of a total of $2.2 billion in relief for unemployment insurance and trust fund. Those benefits were extended for an additional 13 weeks. Those are the type of things that was important for businesses, tangible, that they could actually relate to, and making sure that no chargebacks went against businesses until after at least 2021 from unemployment issues wasn't very, very important as well. And the other was to make sure that we had legislation, that there was a Fair Business Treatment Act, ensuring that the playing field was level for small businesses and the big box stores where we saw what was the definition of essential businesses when this first started. Those are all important things for businesses that we did.
Okay. New question, 90 seconds. What should the state do and state lawmakers do in the recovery phase once a vaccine becomes available? And Representative Brady, you start on that one.
Well, the first thing we have to do is get back to our priorities of what state government should be, I believe, and that is public education, public infrastructure, and public safety. Those dollars that we have in a budget, whenever that vaccine becomes available, and I hope it's obviously, as I know my opponent does, sooner rather than later, is the reality that the pressure on state government and their finances, just like any other form of government, is massive, and it's going to be a long-term effect. But one of the things we can do is prioritize our spending and pay attention to what our state constitution says. Public education, public infrastructure, and public safety. Stay out of the other areas where we don't have the dollars. Focus in on those to help us try and get back up on our feet.
And Councilmember Cummings, what will be needed in the recovery phase for the state to act to speed things along?
I believe that the three things that we should be focusing on are slightly different than my opponent. While I do agree education is certainly one of the things that we need to focus on, we do need to look at our overall economy, and that does include how our budget and our pension issues that we continue to face. We need to get on that and not continue to let it linger anymore. But we also certainly need to look at the social equity issues. They have been boiled up amidst the COVID-19, and we can't no longer sleep on that, and we can no longer just let that just pass without it being addressed.
And a follow-up question. Both of you will have 1 minute on the same question, so I'll go back to Dan Brady on this. Cities and municipalities are seeing drops in revenue and difficulty continuing to extend services because of those drops in revenue. Should there be state assistance in that event once the recovery actually begins?
Well, I think every form of government is going to have to, as I've said in the past here, Charlie, is going to have to prioritize and prioritize what their spending is going to be. We passed the state budget. I didn't vote for it, but a state budget was passed with roughly $42.9 billion, even though the state only expects to bring in under $36 billion. And that was included $5 billion in additional borrowing. So that's about a $6.1 billion deficit. And we don't even know for sure what the effects of COVID is going to be. Where we can come to help in municipalities and townships and other forms of government is the fact through our capital budget. And we have, through different means in Springfield, over the course of the last 2 years, worked very hard on a capital bill that provides assistance to those very budget areas that you've talked about with government, for roads, for bridges, for infrastructure, and for trying to get people back to work. And we've done the very, very same thing with those ideas across the state that we've done, and I've done in my district for the town of Normal, for constitutional extension to Constitutional Trail, for infrastructure needs, for repairs on roads such as Oak Street and water infrastructure, and most recently for a $1 million grant that will be coming to the town of Normal towards the building of the new fire station.
Okay.
Those are the things we need to do.
Thank you, sir. Kimberly Cummings, should the state directly help cities and towns with aid?
Thank you, Charlie, for that question. It's one of the things that I actually have been advocating for through Illinois Municipal League, as well as actually the National League of Cities, for us not only get assistance at the state level, but the federal level as well. Communities are going to need it. Many communities were already having troubles and struggling. Yes, we know the infrastructure bill has been passed to help with that portion, but there's so many other things that needs to be maintained with our communities. And we know that it's not a trivial thing or very small thing to say or throw an easy solution to. We're going to have to take some time to figure this out. And yes, many communities will have to do some reprioritizing as well as the state, but we have to work together to ensure that our communities have what they need in order to be better and thrive.
Okay, for a new question. This is 89.1 FM WGLT and WGLT.org. Thanks for listening to this forum featuring Kimberly Cummings and Dan Brady, the Democratic and Republican candidates respectively for the State House in the 105th District, covering parts of Bloomington, Normal, and Points East. This goes first to Kimberly Cummings. The national dialogue on police violence and racial justice has heated up and goes on. What would you do legislatively in Springfield to address those issues in Illinois?
Thank you, Charlie. We are seeing a lot going on with police violence and racial justice issues. And as I've spoken before, that is something we have to address, the social inequities overall that our communities are experiencing. It's going to be very important that we have real conversations about legislation that a lot of times, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, have a greater impact on people of color and how how people of color are viewed. And so we have to be more intentional in our legislation and also ask for what the impact will be. We know oftentimes that a lot of economic decisions go hand in hand with how it's played out against racial injustices. And so we have to make sure that any legislation we pass does not, in the long run, impact inequitable to our constituents of who are minorities or people of color, or of any group that may not be considered the majority.
And Dan Brady, racial justice is the topic. What should Springfield and the General Assembly do about that?
Well, there's several things, and obviously racial justice is extremely important. Justice is extremely important, and racial justice is something that I would anticipate that as we, my colleagues and I, Democrats and Republicans, work together on those issues, there has been movement afoot for legislation that is dealing with reforms in the way of police training, in the way of investigation of departments and what their ratio of arrests are of minorities versus others. There has been legislation that has been discussed, some filed, but one piece of legislation that I co-sponsored and worked with Representative Mary Flowers on is the Economic Vitality Plan. And what this plan has been developed for is to look at and explore a new domestic investment plan from a funding side of things to promote economic growth and recovery in targeted African American communities across this state. And that is something that, by means of looking at that particular level of the issues, can be extremely helpful. From other sides of things, I believe that if we do have a session in the fall, referred to as a veto session, that in particular there will be a number of pieces of legislation that have been put forth that we may be dealing with in the way of our criminal justice system in this state. And so I think it'll be a several-pronged approach, if you will, but I think the Economic Vitality Plan is something that many of us can agree upon and work together on.
All righty. Thank you, sir. What lawmakers choose to work on and specialize in is important for voters to know. It lends some personality to their custody of the offices to which voters elect them. For some people, it's education, the environment, or business growth and economic development. Many other things can be specialties of lawmakers. In addition to the regular constituent services any lawmaker has to be good at, what issues touch or have touched your heart that you want to emphasize if the voters choose you or choose you again? And Representative Brady, you start on that one.
Thank you, Charlie. And when you say constituent services, not every representative is good at that. Maybe, as you said, needs to be. I can agree with that, but not everyone is, and there's different levels for that. And that's the front lines that a constituent interacts with an office. But I've been very much on higher education and serve in appropriation higher education as the minority Republican spokesman. Insurance, that's important to our community, I've been part of. Election campaigns and reforms finance committee, I've been part of. And then personally and special to me, with my son, Tom, who's special needs, has been serving on the Special Commission on Special Needs in Springfield. Those are areas that are important to our district from an economic and educational standpoint, from a personal side of things, on the special needs side of things. That's very important to me and to so many across the state of Illinois.
Okay. And Kimberly Cummings, your answer. What do you want to specialize in? What would you bring as a particular area of interest and gained expertise?
Yes, I think for me, it's certainly education and foremost. Starting off as being an education major, that's still that passion within me, believing that education is a key to unlock a lot of doors in our lives, and certainly a key to our communities overall. I think also to talk once again, talking about social equity and criminal justice reform. Those are issues that are near and dear to my heart and have impacted even my own life, whether directly or indirectly. And so those things still hold very true to me to this day. And never forgetting, when we talk about our budgeting, economy, and pensions, that is something that is still, I understand from being on city council, the impacts that it has even down to our municipalities. And so those are the things that I would be most interested to continue to work on and work hard for our constituents on.
Okay. This is 89.1 FM WGLT and WGLT.org and a candidates forum with the Democrat and Republican candidates for the 105th District House seat. I'm Charlie Schlenker. How do you think the public pension underfunding issue should be addressed? I've been asking potential lawmakers that question for more than 15 years now, and there is still no real concrete way forward that has come out of the General Assembly. So, Kimberly Cummings, you start on this one. What is the shape of an acceptable way forward that is going to get bipartisan support and a governor's signature?
This is very difficult question really to answer because it's not as easy as people would like to make it out to be. I know there's certainly some things that we can certainly try to push forward, and I hope that in a bipartisan way that we begin to have those conversations. Once again, one, talking about the fair tax and having that revenue available to address some of the pension issues, but also talking about reamortization. Once again, there is plenty of information out there that it could be very helpful to us as we move forward and can begin to help us see some relief by 2042 if we begin to move in that direction. So we certainly have opportunities to have some real dialogue and real conversation, but I don't want to trivialize it to make it seem like there's this quick fix for it, but we certainly have to be intentional.
Dan Brady, how do you see this thing finally getting addressed?
Well, there's been numerous attempts in the legislature addressing this, Charlie, and the closest we've come since I've been serving as representative has been a piece of legislation that was supported by, for the most part, all the major stakeholders. And that particular piece of legislation dealt with the priority funding from the legislature, a combination of bonds and a combination of long-term stability for those that are presently on a pension, and then also looking at for those coming in and into the new pension, there was changes made. But whatever we do, we have to have something that's going to meet the constitutional and state Supreme Court's test. It's going to pass their test. That legislation, which did not get called in the House, moved over from the Senate, has probably had the greatest potential that I've seen. But it gets back to what I said earlier. It's going to be our priorities in spending. This particular hole that's been dug in the pensions for a variety of reasons, economy, lack of the legislature putting in what they should have been putting in over the years, and now the combination of COVID is a kind of a recipe for a perfect storm. What's going to have to be done is the priority and long-term bonding of what we're going to do and what we can get back to pay into those pensions to stabilize them. The people that are on those pensions paid into them, they're entitled to them. No one disputes that. How we are going to get something together that passes the state constitution or the U.S. State Supreme Court test is wherein the problem has lied and has continued to lie as work continues on it.
Okay, thank you. You're listening to 89.1 FM WGLT and WGLT.org, Bloomington Normal's public media. Is the state spending money on the right things? What do you want to see more of or less of in spending? Representative Brady, you start on this one.
Well, I think that coming off of 2 years of a budget impasse, the state was just beginning to see, and quite frankly, in a lot of areas, some bipartisan cooperation of spending in correct areas. Now, don't agree with everything by any stretch of the imagination. We were getting back a little bit on track with our universities and the prioritizing of spending for them that they hadn't had in 2 years. We were getting back in some other areas related to public safety in the state and the spending. And then has come COVID. I believe the state was doing better, was on a little better stable ground, was doing better in turning around paying our long-term care facilities and nursing homes, was looking at trying to pay down some debt, but was a long way from where it should be. This is going to set us back many years. Is unfortunate. But the reality is right now, what we're trying to prioritize our spending on is what's important for health and safety and business and the vital parts of what's important to this economy in the state and the 105th district. If you look just recently, and I thank the governor for his work with myself on securing continued testing at the Bloomington Interstate Center when that was going to be pulled out. I worked very hard on that when the National Guard was going to leave. And also, we have received recently rounds of business interruption grants. Over $230,000 have come into this district, the 105th, for over 10 businesses, between 10 to 20-some thousand dollars. That is the type of thing in an emergency spending plan that's important to keep businesses afloat.
Okay. Councilmember Cummings, what's your take on what we're doing right in spending and what we're doing wrong in spending, more of and less of?
I do agree with my opponent that we did start to see some improvements in the way the state was beginning to handle its finances and the way it was handling some spending. But as also stated, we know that COVID has brought on some new challenges to our community, and we will have to focus quite a bit of our spending on that, and it does run the gamut from everything to our health safety, as well as, once again, education, because we want to be able to return our students back to school safely, and we want to make sure that everything is in place for them to do that, and so make sure that's available. We want to make sure that our economies can rebound, so making sure businesses have what they need, and whatever form that may come in, and most certainly continue to address issues within racial and social equity. And so I think those are areas that we will need to look at doing some additional spending. But once again, yes, I understand there's going to have to be some reprioritization to make that happen.
Okay. Illinois is a high property tax state and a middle-of-the-road income tax state comparatively with other states. What's the appropriate mix of property tax to income tax? Of course, you have to take into account the history wherein much of the school district systems in the state are funded by property tax. But how should Illinois shift to whatever is the appropriate mix that you believe should be? Kimberly Cummings, you're first.
Yes, thank you, Charlie. The reality is that we will have to certainly take a look at how we are continuing to fund schools. We do know that we're coming to a place where many communities are feeling the pinch of the property tax burden in order to continue to fund our schools. But we can't stop funding them. They are vital to our communities. Many people move to communities based off of what's available as it relates to education. And so we know that has to happen. We can't stop making sure that they have what they need. And once again, post-COVID-19, it's even more important that we do that. So what the mix actually should be, I think we have to continue to look at that. But we know that there's so much that a state needs to provide for every resident within the state. And so we'll have to continue to, in order to make that decision on what's the best mix, we'll have to take a look overall. But we cannot afford to reduce what we are giving to our school systems, but find ways to continue to enhance and make sure that our schools are well off in the future.
Representative Brady, do you like the mix? Should it be changed? And if so, to what?
Well, thanks for the easy question, Charlie. I appreciate that. First off, I don't think there's anybody you would talk to that would say, could I pay more property taxes? Especially when you have those that don't see the benefits of what maybe our local school districts do. We know we have a new funding formula, relatively new, the last couple of years of funding formula in the state. That's been helpful, but that has not been the answer to everything that we need. I think if you look at the property tax issue, and I've been part of the property tax subcommittee that studied the issue last summer and came up with several recommendations of property tax issues. But the reality is, I don't think we can go to the well of property taxes and ask for more. And so it gets back to what I've been kind of saying in my theme through our discussion here tonight, and that is our priorities of spending. And if that priority is education, public safety, public infrastructure, then we need to make those a priority. And that's what hasn't been done in the General Assembly.
All right. A 1 minute follow up here. Should the state transition to funding schools via the income tax and not on property tax? And we'll go with the same order. So, Kimberly Cummings, you're first.
Thank you. I think it probably will be more of a mix, and I've stated earlier, we hope that if the Fair Tax Act, the Fair Tax is passed, that is certainly something we hope will be used for. And I think there will have to be this mix that we continue to be able to fund the new funding formula to ensure our schools have what they need.
And Representative Brady, is there any appetite on your part for shifting the education base to income tax?
No, Charlie, I don't believe so. I think if you talk to any superintendent throughout the state, the first thing they would say is, whatever you do, don't send more of my money to Springfield and then decide from the legislature standpoint what's going to be doled out. At least with the property tax situation, as difficult and high as they are for people across this state, that's the percentage for public education stays local. And that's something that's tangible and that they can plan on, they being the superintendents. You shift something to income tax, and it gets back to what I have seen and experienced throughout my career with being state representative, and that is that Springfield just can't help itself when it comes to spending of revenue. So if we send them more revenue, we're only feeding the animal, in my opinion. And if we think we're going to send it by income tax, and we think we're going to get some guarantee out of Springfield that it's going to go where we all believe it should go, I think we're certainly going to be fooling ourselves.
All righty. This is Bloomington Normal's Public Media, WGLT. I'm Charlie Schlenker, and you're listening to a candidate forum with State Representative Dan Brady and challenger Kimberly Cummings. Let me set the stage for this next question. The number of shooting incidents in Bloomington Normal rose sharply last year to more than 50, even though the number of fatalities fell from the previous year. This year, we're at more than 19, even with the reduction in people associating and moving about caused by the pandemic. Police chiefs cite gun culture and the availability of guns, not particularly mental health, as the chief reasons for shooting incidents. Moms demand action for gun sense in Bloomington Normal, calls for better background checks and gun safety education. A survey conducted for Pew by the National Police Research Platform, and that's a consortium of researchers headquartered at the University of Illinois Chicago, finds 88% of police support making private gun sales and sales at gun shows subject to background checks. So what do you want to do to replace and to reduce gun violence in Illinois and Bloomington Normal? Kimberly Cummings, you're first.
Yes, we know that gun violence is certainly an issue in our communities, and we have to continue to ensure that we are fighting in a way that reduces that. I certainly agree with Moms Demand Action in ensuring that we have stronger background check on those who are purchasing the guns. There's also a greater conversation to talk about the access and who's accessing those guns. But it is so important and so vital to our communities to ensure that we reduce gun violence because it is, while, yes, fatalities are down now, we don't know what's to come in the future. And we have to ensure that the safety of our communities by making sure that we do what is necessary to protect them.
And Representative Brady, what would you like to see to address gun violence?
Well, Charlie, I just went through a situation to where a sad situation of an individual that was dealing from the mental health side of things and was denied the gun in Illinois, but figured out a way to get the gun in Wisconsin and take his life. I think we've made strides in Illinois, but right now we find ourselves, for those who are legitimate gun owners and want to follow the laws of a FOID card, concealed carry, the list goes on, of our state police from an issuance standpoint and a background check, not having the sufficient staff in which to do that. That needs to be looked at. The background side of things can most definitely be improved. But the overall getting guns out of the hands of criminals who illegally get those guns is where a biggest root of the problem is. And when you find the solution to that, and there are many things that have been tried, but one of the things that I don't disagree with, that there could be more in the way of systematic checks. However, if we're going to ask for that, we've got to do better than what's going on right now when legal citizens following our laws, cannot get what they're entitled to under the Constitution of the United States, and therefore they're penalized unfairly. And so we need to do better than having something in statute that says it's supposed to be done by 90 days and the background check completed, and it takes much longer than that, much longer than that if it even gets done.
Okay, thank you. New question, 90 seconds, and it will go to Representative Brady first. Domestic violence reports in McLean County have doubled from pre-pandemic levels. It's one of the most common calls for police service out there. And apart from this year, the numbers are remarkably steady over the long haul. That indicates government and society should do something to change the calculus of that, to change things. What might you do to affect that issue in Springfield? Representative Brady, you're first.
Or from the level of state government, and the first would be working with the local governments who's providing those resources. Now, in a domestic situation, counseling, having services, the Department of Human Services, and funding those services is all something that you're going to have to continue to work and try and find the best model in which to do that. But the family nuclei, in my observation of things, is so distorted and has changed so much with so many different pressures on families and single parents and other youth problems throughout the state, that has caused enormous problems and enormous pressure in this area of domestic violence and in the area of mental health and in the area of those social service agencies. The state providing at least stable financial resources and paying their bills to them would be a big step in the right direction.
And Councilmember Cummings, domestic violence, how to get at those numbers that remain stubbornly high and common.
Yes, thank you, Charlie. This is something very near and dear to my heart as I've watched women very close to me be victims of domestic violence. And so this is one that's very personal for me. However, there is some truth. We do need to work with local agencies and making sure that they have what's necessary to be a resource and an advocacy for those who are victims of domestic violence. But once again, we have to make sure that we're providing them with some type of assistance because many of the agencies that do work in this space are non-for-profit or do not, they fundraise and money is low or hard to access. And so certainly a boost from the state can help them continue. But, I think it's not something new with domestic violence. It has been around for a long time. And we need to at least allow people to know that we're here, we're able to support you, and that you have what's necessary to feel safe in our communities.
You're listening to a 105th State House District Candidate Forum. This is 89.1 FM WGLT and WGLT.org. What does the state do well in facilitating economic development, and what does it lack, and what should lawmakers do to address it? Councilmember Cummings, you're first.
Thank you. I think the state does well when it wants to in aiding some of the communities with assistance. I think one of the greatest things was the infrastructure bill because many projects look for infrastructure already to be in place in communities before they come and develop. So that has been certainly a tremendous add to what our communities across the state can do and help improve the economic development. I think some of the things that we can continue to improve on is certainly making ourselves sound a little bit more better than what we do. We as leaders are to be ambassadors for our community, and I think we have not done quite a good job about that. We tout about some of the negativity, but we need to change that in order to certainly be a place where businesses will become interested. We are a diamond in the rough, especially I tout about the 105th district in particular, but there's so much that more we can do to certainly put us out there and get ready for new development and help our communities to grow.
Representative Brady, economic development. What does Illinois do well? What does it need improvement on? And how would you do it?
Well, Illinois is seated in just the righteous area of Interstate 55, 74, 39. Our economy from agriculture, our economy of higher education, the businesses that are in this state. In the 105th district, look at just some of the businesses that are here, from the Roth Turkey Farm in my district out in the Fairbury Forest area to the district that with Bryant North and Hudson, to other businesses that have been here and have continued to grow under the situation. So there's good things. I think the TIF districts that the state works with on local business is very, very important, and I've done so with the town of Normal. I think the capital bill that we worked on in the last really 2 years at this point, one of the biggest capital bills that have been there with the needs that are out there. And just in my district alone, we're talking that there was millions, 166 miles of roads and bridges, including parts of Interstate 55, 74, Veterans Parkway, the Main Street Corridor. McLean County alone, $170 million pledged towards roads in my district. That is extremely important for not only in a situation we find ourselves now, for the future of putting people back to work, but the infrastructure that we need. So the state has done good in those areas. Is there room for improvement? Absolutely yes. And I think by the continuing economic development and getting past the situation we're in right now and looking forward to brighter days, that some of the right things are in place. But the other reality is we have to keep business off the backs of businesses and the continuous regulation that goes into businesses and drives businesses out, especially in these trying times with COVID.
All right. 1 minute follow-up. Much of the nation's economic engine, even in spite of the growth in online retail, is small businesses in small to medium-sized communities. What should the state do more of to support the growth of small businesses? 1 minute to Kimberly Cummings.
Yes, I think certainly the state can work with municipalities to continue to offer great things that will help small businesses along the way. I know that we have programs like the SBDC that are very vital, but there's other things that need to go along with that. I think one of the things is it's very hard a lot of times, especially for minorities and for women to get into business. But yes, small businesses are really the cornerstone of America. And it has been said before that it's going to take small businesses really to help this country recover post the pandemic. So the state does have an opportunity and I hope that we can prioritize funding for small businesses and ensure that they get a boost up to begin or to grow, so that it'll help all of our communities.
And 1 minute to Representative Brady.
From the state's perspective, looking at what they continue to do with partnering with municipalities, looking what they can continue to do with help the municipalities, and some of the things I've mentioned, capital bill, grants, the small business interruption grants that we've done, grants for small business in particular during this time. That would be nice if some of that can continue to help to grow and flourish. That's going to be a big challenge with the financial pressures beyond the state. But I think, as I said earlier, the amount of red tape that the state puts on a business to try and continue to move forward. The university alone in Illinois State, I was part of a group that looked at just the purchasing hurdles and roadblocks that they have to try and jump over to order certain things. That type of oversight and redundancy has to be reduced, and it has to be reduced for those that have small business. And the state needs to be a business that can flourish from the standpoint of giving those small businesses more of a level playing field and staying off their backs when it comes to regulation that chokes them to death.
This is 89.1 FM, WGLT, and WGLT.org, Bloomington Normal's public media. The long-running federal corruption probe into Commonwealth Edison lobbying and state lawmakers continues. What ethics and transparency measures do you believe should be enacted to cover the General Assembly and statewide elected officials? Dan Brady, you were first.
Well, Charlie, when you look at Springfield and you look at the culture of corruption and what's reported from Springfield, it has just shaken, if not shattered, the public trust in government and state government. We, the House Republicans, have had an ethics reform package of which I have co-sponsored about 4 or 5 pieces of legislation, all that would be helpful. You know, trying to regulate and trying to regulate by law ethics in a person is very difficult to do. From the standpoint of simply not knowing right from wrong makes things very difficult to legislate. But certain things that we can do and some of the ethic reforms that we've proposed that have never even been called is dealing with things as small as if a piece of legislation has co-sponsors of both parties up to 5 people, why can't that legislation move forward in a process and be heard? And that decision not be left to one person why it should or should not. We should have more of in-depth reporting from the standpoint of an individual's background when they're in elected office, similar to what judges have to go through in their reporting mechanism on their statement of economic interest. There's a number of other proposals that we've had as far as legislation goes, solid pieces of legislation that many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle as Democrats support, but have never got to the starting gate. So the idea of how legislation flows in Springfield, especially ethics legislation, obviously needs to be changed. And that issue is no more present than what's going on today.
All righty, thank you. Councilmember Cummings, ethics reform, what would you support to address the situation?
Well, certainly, I think to begin and have a true conversation about ethics reform, we have to look at who's regulating who. And when the body is regulating from an ethics standpoint themselves, I think that's an issue. I think there should be an outside body of, constituents who are gathered, who actually lead that, because right now that's not what is happening. And so I think that is the beginning of the turning point when you're speaking of ethics, and that will be very crucial in how we look at that going forward.
All right. The Fair Maps proposal for nonpartisan redistricting to end gerrymandering has been around for a while. What are your thoughts about that and the general problem of gerrymandering? If you don't like that particular proposal, what would you do? Kimberly Cummings, you're first.
Thank you. Yes, certainly that there has been an issue for quite some time with gerrymandering and it being more political. I think once again, this is something where I believe a third party is necessary, who it's not party affiliated, to draw the districts and draw them, in a way that truly brings clear representation for districts. And so I think we really need to focus on that as we go forward. I think a lot of times that there are groups of people who feel left out because of this type of current system of drawing maps, and it breaks up districts in ways that leave you questioning when we know what the alternate initial motive has been. So we do need to certainly change how we're drawing our maps.
All right. Dan Brady.
Well, certainly, just think of the hundreds of thousands of people that have put their signatures on a petition for fair maps, to have it removed and changed from the process that it goes through now, where, quite frankly, the majority party draws the legislative maps for state and federal boundaries. Until you remove that, you're not going to remove the politics out of fair maps. It's very important, and especially important now when we're approaching the census that needs to be completed in the next 20 days. So I hope everyone is doing that in their part, because for the next 10 years when these maps are drawn, that's what this particular district is going to look like in the 105th or whatever the number may be. How do you change that? Well, you're not going to change it until you take the politics out of it. How do you do that? You do something like Iowa did. You have the use of technology, and you draw those maps with the use of technology based on population basis, not on political priorities and power.
All right. I think we'll have time for one more question before closing statements. It's a philosophical one, but maybe you have examples in both of your lives of public service that can address it. When is compromise in the legislative sense good? When should any lawmaker stand on principle? And Representative Brady, go for it.
Well, I think the individual representative, in our case, my case, would need to stand where they believe comfortable of what they are doing by representing the people they hear from, the very constituents that you represent, whatever that issue may be. There are those that are the headline grabbers, and you hear from people. There are those that are not. But I think one particular thing that's most recent, at least for me, is working across the aisle with Representative Jay Hoffman in producing the Workers' Compensation and Unemployment Insurance Agreement, which was good for workers and good for business. And politics was put aside because of the pandemic emergency that we needed to provide in the way of workers' comp and unemployment insurance agreements and assistance to workers and businesses. Politics was put aside, and the stakeholders came together with direction from both the Democrat and the Republican side of the aisle, and we put together, as I alluded to earlier, a package of legislation that truly helped the frontline workers affected and infected by COVID. That's an example of coming together and when you need to come together and leave the politics at the side. There's other things that are important to districts, and when you have to stand a certain area of your district for something that's important from an educational standpoint to your schools or to your university, or something that's an economic engine in your district. Those are the areas where I at least draw the lines more. I'm in the minority, and I understand that. And I don't get something done unless I work with the majority party. That's what I've worked hard at over the years as representative, and I think the people that I represent appreciate a common sense approach like that.
Councilmember Cummings, when do you say nope, and when do you say I can work with this? How do you draw that line between compromise and principle?
Well, I certainly want to make sure that there's a distinguished separation between principle and politics too. Principle is something that you have from day one, and so there's certain non-negotiables that you have when it comes to social equity and people's rights, and people having access to what should help them live better lives. Those are things that are just non-negotiables. But then when it comes to compromise, and I think we all have to understand that there's compromise in everything. There's compromise when you're in a marriage. There's compromise when you live with your family. And so we should be comfortable understanding the necessity of compromise in order to reach a goal, a common goal that you should have. And so I think what the common goal should be is making our state better, helping our state to grow, helping our state to do better and for the future. And so compromise will be necessary, but knowing from day one what my principles are and what will be my non-negotiables will be critical.
And Representative Brady.
Well, I think, Charlie, I answered that question.
Oh, all right.
Of where I stand as far as principles and compromise.
I got my order mixed up there.
That's okay.
My apologies.
That happens to the best of us.
That response brings us to the end of the question period of the forum and 2-minute closing statements. Representative Brady, you went second for opening statements, and you can lead off for closings.
Thank you very much, Charlie, and thank you to WGLT for hosting this forum. As I stated in my opening remarks, the continued long-lasting effects of COVID-19 will be felt on state government for an unknown period of time in the future. And speaking of the future, I believe it will be brighter for the people of the 105th District, being represented by a state representative who knows the people, and the people know him. That representative is me, Dan Brady. Being endorsed by the Illinois Education Association, the Associated Firefighters of Illinois, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, the Illinois Sheriff's Association, or the Illinois Retired Teachers Association, or receiving the State Chamber of Commerce Business Award or the Farm Bureau Activator Award. All very nice honors, but there's no greater honor than representing the people of the 105th District. Working on both sides of the aisle, being the proven and experienced representative the people have come to depend on, is the endorsement that provides the people of the 105th District their strongest voice. I'm running for re-election as state representative because I put my heart and soul in my work for the people of the 105th District. I ask for your vote on November 3rd, and I thank you all for all of our work together.
Councilmember Cummings, your closing remarks.
Yes, thank you. Again, I would like to thank WGLT for hosting tonight's debate, to you, Charlie Schlinker, for being a wonderful moderator, and most of all to the listeners who will be voting on November 3rd. Tonight's debate really illustrated the two choices for state representative. I have illustrated it is time for us to do better. It is time for us to revive Illinois strong and energetic, most specifically in three areas: education, our economy, and social equity. Socially equitable communities have strong, thriving economies, and healthy educational systems. A fresh face and fresh ideas can help us to do better. 2 decades and we still face issues regarding inequitable access to education, inequitable treatment of all citizens, and a state working to pull itself out of an economic and pension crisis. It is time for us to rise. I hope that you will vote for me so that we can do better together. My name is Kimberly Cummings, and on November 3rd, vote for me to be your next state representative.